Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March 18th, 2014 business meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. We have a quorum of members present. I'd like to call the meeting to order. To begin the meeting, I'd like to invite Juliana Wood, who is a second grade student at Salem Avenue Elementary. If she'd come to the microphone, she will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, Juliana.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce any guests that you brought with you today? Who came with you?
My mom.
Wave your hand, Mom. Where's Mom? Hi, Mom. And who else?
Nobody. Nobody else.
How about the guy sitting right over there in the front row?
Oh, yeah. My principal.
Principal, yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you like to do when you're not in school?
I like to play soccer. I like to play with my dolls.
Excellent, excellent. And tell us what your favorite subject is in school.
Math.
Now, did I tell you I don't want to hear the answer until you came there? Good for you. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you, Mom, for bringing her here. Thank you, Mr. Gardner, for recommending her and bringing her. You did a fabulous job, and we expect you, and we know you're going to continue to do great things. Okay?
Thank you.
Any board members have any guests that they'd like to introduce?
I'd like to introduce Coleman McHose. He is the student member of the board intern, and he will be taking my position July 1st of this year.
Great. Welcome, Coleman. Any other members have guests they'd like to introduce? And I'll say as we get started, Mrs. Fisher sends her regrets. She became ill this morning and sends her regrets to everybody that she can't make it. So that brings us to approval of the agenda.
Mr. President, I move to approve the agenda as presented by the Agenda Committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Brightman, second by Mr. Ridenhour to approve the agenda. Are there any amendments or any discussion on the agenda? If not, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 6-0 and the student member concurs. That brings us to the minutes.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of minutes from 3 different sessions. Closed session on Tuesday, March the 4th, 2014. Also from a business meeting on the same date. And we held a public budget hearing with minutes on Tuesday, March the 11th. I would like to move for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bailey, second by Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Are there any amendments or corrections? If not, all those in favor of approval? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 6-0 and the student member concurs. That brings us to public comment. We have several individuals signed up to speak. Public comment is an opportunity for the board to receive feedback from the community that we serve. We welcome and encourage members to speak and let us know what's on your mind. Speakers are allotted 5 minutes. Nobody's going to cut you off at 5 minutes, but because we do want to hear what you have to say. So the first individual signed up to speak is Dr. Kia Tisdale. Is Dr. Tisdale here? Welcome. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I don't know if they can turn up your mic because it was kind of hard to hear you towards the back.
Okay.
Okay.
Richard, you got that? All right.
So my name's Kia Tisdale, and I was here in the fall. I am a parent of a first grader at Rockland Woods Elementary School. And last fall, I visited the board to specifically ask about strategies surrounding recruitment and hiring of minorities. Certainly, initially, when I came to the board that time, it was purely selfish reasoning. I wanted for my son's Harrison, his self-esteem and ambition to be enriched by, not cultivated, but enriched by what he saw in a place where he spent most of his time, which was the school. And for a lot of people, especially children, seeing someone in a role of respect and responsibility that resembles you makes that role or that position an option for you. And Mr. Wilcox, you had said something similar to that when I visited the board in October. I soon realized that a lot of children in this county would benefit from seeing someone who resembled them in positions of responsibility and admiration. So I was disappointed at the seemingly absolute lack of minorities at his school. I can only speak for his school because that's where I visit, and hence my first trip to the board. Shortly after that visit, a task force was created to address that issue, and I was very glad to see that. Recently, I learned the actual statistics surrounding this issue, that being nearly 30% of the student body identify themselves as non-white, while a mere 3.8% of the teachers identify themselves as non-white. In light of the evidence that supports the impact of diversity on success of children's education, these figures, in my opinion, were shameful. Following the last task force meeting, I found myself disillusioned with the process and wrote an email detailing my feelings to Ms. Francisco and urged her to share my letter with her peers, which she did. I was asked to come in for a meeting, which I did. And I wanted to comment about one of the comments that stuck out most to me following that meeting, and these were comments made by Dr. Marco about the experiences of previous minorities in the school system, and some of them having mentioned an underlying element of racism. And he also mentioned or referenced a comment made by a colleague, not made by him himself, that there could potentially be a danger in hiring someone just because they're black. And I think there may have been a bit of a misunderstanding on his part about something that I said in the email, which I'm sure you guys could get a copy of. But the reason those comments stuck out to me, and I don't think there was any malice intended, but it goes back to something I said at the very first task force meeting, and that is diversity brings about sensitivity. So if you suspect that there is an underlying resistance to diversity, then a way to change that is to change the face of the culture that fosters that potential element. The other reason that the comments kind of stuck with me after the visit and encouraged me to really ask that other people come out in support of this issue, which they have, and I thank them for that, is because I don't want there to be a misconception, at least when I say minority, that I mean black. Of course, because I am black, that's an important minority to me, but there are a lot of minorities, Asian, Pacific Islander, Hawaiian, children who are of different or of multiple racial backgrounds. And so to say, so if, there's a danger in equating minority with black, but even if you do identify minority as black, what is the danger in hiring a qualified candidate just because they're black? If you meet a basic level of criteria and you also meet the need of filling a need in the community, then how could there be a danger in that? And I certainly don't intend to put words in anyone's mouth, but that is a direct quote. And so I wanted to come to the board again to ask, what has been your briefing of the task force, the progress of the task force, and any changes that you see being made in the near future. And that is my comment. Thanks.
Normally, we reserve any response to public comment until after all the public comments are made, but Dr. Wilcox, the task force has been your initiative, sort of at the board's direction. Do you want to provide a response to Dr. Tisdale?
Well, I'm not sure that I can provide an adequate response, but what I can say is that the task force has met, I believe, on 4 occasions. They have put together a fairly, I think, careful study of some of the issues that we face as a school system. This has been going on simultaneously with a redevelopment of our entire HR processes, from not only our recruiting materials, but where we choose to recruit. I think when we looked back on past years, we did not recruit actively in HBCUs. We did not go where we would find people of color, whether they would be African American, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander.
Right.
We simply didn't go those places with any regularity, with a specific target for trying to entice people to come join us in Washington County. The direct answer is the board has not been briefed in the 4 months that we've had this, because we haven't had anything to talk to them about yet, because we're just now entering the recruiting season. We have fairly specific metrics on who we've talked to, and once we get to our second or third venue, then we'll come back and say, here's who we've talked to, here's who we're tracking, here's who we're trying to bring to the district. Because the board is not engaged in the day-to-day or the operational details of this plan. So that's why the board doesn't have specific details about what's going on. But as the superintendent of schools, I do. You should probably know, and we've not gotten to know each other, but this board 3 years ago, when they brought me to the district, talked to me about some of the issues that they had relative to diversity. Those issues were we weren't a diverse enough school system. I don't know if you realize this or not, but they hired a Mexican-American as the superintendent of schools.
I was
am.
aware.
Even though my surname is Wilcox, I'm a stealthy Mexican. The first person that I had the opportunity to hire, I hired the chief academic officer of this school system. And many of you probably don't realize this, but the chief academic officer of this school system, Dr. Demain, are you in here?
She was.
She was here? African-American female. So we do have a commitment to diversity, but what we have not been able to do yet is kind of bridge that place where we're hiring black teachers to be in our classrooms, or lots of Latino teachers to be in our classrooms, so kids see them. But we do absolutely respect the position that you bring, and we share it, and that is that young people have to see themselves in their classrooms if they're going to develop aspirations to they themselves better their life. The first time a young black student in our school system sees a black person, and please understand, I have great respect and dignity for all work and for all the people who work in the school system. But, you know, maybe they ought to see their classroom teacher as a black person as opposed to the food service worker.
Right.
Maybe they ought to see, and again,
But
please.
they're not even seeing the food service worker.
Well, to some degree, you're absolutely correct. But I guess what I would say, and I feel I'm rambling just a little bit, is we are absolutely committed, but we're only 4 months into this process, and quite honestly, we're not even to the hiring season. We had just our first recruiting season this year. We were ramped up a year ago, but we also hired a new human resources director who's now having her touch, and that's Mrs. Francisco.
Right.
So, you know, we're really taking some baby steps, but we're committed. We're going to do better each year. I will tell you, that, and you know, statistics make liars of us all, but when I came to the district, there were 8 black teachers in the school district, 8. Today, at least, we have twice that number.
Right.
So, you know, some might say, well, that's no progress at all, but it is, I think, baby steps in the right direction. That said, I would, you know, I'd gladly talk to you offline or however you'd like to do that, but that's where we are today.
And I just want to thank the people who came out today. Most of them I don't even know personally, but I thought it was important to make sure, at least in my mind, that this is recognized as not an issue just for me, but for a lot of people who maybe up until this point maybe even grew up here, who had made the realization but didn't quite know what to do with the realization. And so I'm just thankful that people took time out of their day to come show you that they are also very concerned about this issue and are anticipating changes.
Absolutely, and I thank you for, you know, bringing the issue to the forefront, because quite honestly, it's very easy for even good people to sit by and kind of talk
Exactly.
about the other challenges that we face and not address some of the things that are staring us in the face.
Right.
You know, I will also just say, because I have not met a lot of the folks who are here with you from the community, When the board brought me into the hiring process, I know they carefully looked at my background, and some of the things that they saw was that I was the superintendent of schools in Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which was a majority black school system. 80% of my kids were black kids in Baton Rouge. In Pinellas County, Florida, I had over 40,000 black kids. That's more kids than this entire school system. Now, that school system was a school system of 115,000 kids. But I think the board was looking for somebody who could deal with the issues and the challenges of a school system that's kind of struggling with how it deals with people who are different from them. Okay? And I mean
Okay.
that in a positive way. I know sometimes it doesn't sound very good.
I understand. All right,
And
thank you.
I'll just add, too, that he's absolutely right about, he's being humble about East Baton Rouge, but he was the superintendent there when they were working with the community and the courts to get out from underneath the consent decree that had been in place for how long?
47 years.
47 years. And he succeeded in bringing that community out from under that kind of just unpleasantness that goes along with that process. Unpleasantness for everybody involved, really. And I think as we looked at our community and some of the challenges we have with poverty and the diversity in our community, we wanted somebody who had walked the walk. And I think he's right. Can we do more? Absolutely. And I think this board is committed to it. And I, too, want to thank you all for coming out. We meet every 2 weeks. We'd love to have you all come out.
Always.
Always welcome to be here. It's great to see the room filled. It really is.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Tisdale. Next signed up to speak is Peter Perini. Welcome, Peter. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. My name is Peter Perini, and I am a candidate for the Washington County Board of Education. It's actually it's a pleasure to be here tonight in this beautiful Center for Education Services facility. I want to congratulate Dr. Wilcox and your team for transforming this building into a wonderful center of excellence for education. I'll be brief with my comments, as I'm sure you have a lot to cover this evening. Recently, as I have been carefully monitoring bills currently being heard in the legislature that may have an impact on education, I recognize that there are some that are good and there are some that are bad. I am concerned about the bill, for example, that will change the formula of maintenance of effort funding by tinkering with the definition of recurring cost items. But I am pleased to note that there's a bill to delay the utilization of the Partnership for Access of Readiness for College and Careers testing, also known as the PARC test. In my opinion, this delay is appropriate and will allow school systems to ensure the curriculum has been fully integrated before the test results are used for evaluations and graduation requirements. I also wanted to take a moment this evening to compliment you all on a well-thought-out fiscal 2015 budget. In reviewing this $259 million budget, I see that the cost per pupil in Washington County is projected at approximately $11,680 in fiscal year 15. The Maryland State Department of Education fact book states that this Washington County cost per pupil is in the lowest quartile of the state when it comes to money spent per student. At the same time, Washington County students experience some of the highest test scores in the state. This tells me that through the efficient use of funds, Washington County is achieving a high ROI, or return on investment, of our taxpayer dollars. It's encouraging to see these results, and I would like to see the Board of Education continue its efforts to get the most bang for the buck. I appreciate the diligent work that the board and the administration have done on behalf of our community and of our children's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perini. Any brief response? We have a brief response to the first speaker. Any board members?
Just
Mrs.
a comment on the legislation in reference to the waiver or delaying of the PARC assessment to the 16-17 school year. That legislation is a bit of a duplication because Dr. Lowry, the state superintendent, and the state board, MSDE, they have filed a waiver with the federal Department of Education for that exact deferral of the test counting until 16-17. So I think that one way or the other, that's a discussion that everyone's supportive of having, because we need to possibly slow things down enough to be sure that the tests are reflective of the curriculum that's being taught. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And that's good to know. Obviously, if the result, not only do the results of the test identify, how the children are doing, but also are to be reflective of how the teachers are doing. And we have to make sure we get that right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again for your time.
Next signed up to speak is Mr. Willie Conyers. Mr. Conyers? Welcome. It's nice to see you again, Mr. Conyers.
Glad to be here.
Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Harding, Board of Education members, senior staff, Dr. Marco, Dr. Domain. My name is Willie Conyers. I'm a parent of a 10th grade student at North Hagerstown High School. I'm also a very proud person of being a retired teacher from Washington County Public School System. Before I read my comments, I would like to give some thanks out tonight for my pastor, Rick A. Smith Sr. of Zion Baptist Church, and for all my members of the Zion Baptist Church. I'd like to thank them for their support tonight. I'm going on public record as strongly supporting Dr. Tisdale's efforts and the Washington County Public School Diversity Task Force report to improving the diversity of hiring and recruiting of blacks and Latino professionals in Washington County Public School. Once the final Diversity Task Force report for 2013-2014 has been submitted to the elected Board of Education, and the board accepts the work of this appointed committee, and the board had an opportunity to review and offer their suggestions and their viewpoints on improving diversity hirings in Washington County Public Schools, I would like to return and appear before you and give you my detailed viewpoints on the approved diversity plan for hiring these new teachers. For this next school year, 2014, 2015, and future years. I'd like to first of all thank you for the opportunity to serve on the Diversity Task Force Committee, and I look forward to the opportunity of appearing back before this board.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers. Are there any brief comments from board members? Mr. Conyers? I don't think so. Thank you, Mr. Conyers. And next signed up to speak is Mr. Alfonso Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell here. Welcome, Mr. Mitchell.
Good evening to the board and chairman of the board, superintendent. My name is Alfonso Mitchell. I am a community person. I've been a resident of Washington County since 1990. I've been involved in many organizations, Hagerstown Leadership, the Y Board, Memorial Rec, now Robert Johnson Community Center. I'm involved in our church and in the community overall. A lot of my emphasis has been on mentoring minority students. I'm also a parent. I've had two children who have gone through both the public and the private school system here in Hagerstown. And I'm also a grandfather who has a grandson currently enrolled in the Boonesboro system. My wife and I have both been very active, involved in the school and in various school affairs. My concern is that when I got here in 1990, then in 1991 there was a task force that was convened by the Board of Education at that time under Dr. Gerson, who was then the superintendent of schools. At that time it was discovered, and the results of that task force was that with a growing minority population in the area and a growing minority population in the student enrollment, that they saw a definite need for a more aggressive plan to hire more teachers and more administrative persons of color. Basis being that based on testing and things of that sort, they saw that role models were needed for the students. Now that was back in 1991. Again, I saw an effort that was made late 90s, beginning in 2000, on retention and recruitment, again, of the need for minority teachers. I'll say more teachers because they have made some moves as far as administrative roles. But my concern is that it's not so much of people in the administrative who don't touch the students, but my concern is more of those who will be in touch with the students, the teachers. And over those 24 years, I've seen a lack of true efforts in recruitment and retention of teachers. Now, I've known 3 principals that have been in the school system, I know them well. But the teachers, there was a peak in mid-90s, then it went down, and it really hasn't come back as far as the number of teachers that are needed with this growing diverse population. So my question for the board is not that you're making an effort, and I commend your efforts of having another task force, and I commend the work that those who are on the task force are performing. But my concern is what kind of policies, sustainable policies, procedures, and measurements that the community can see that there is progress being made, that there is action being made. And not only when something comes up and a task force is formed, but I like to see something that says there is a sustainable effort and that the next task force is not one on whys, but on the successes. And I'm asking the board now with another task force, because this is truly the 3rd task force I've seen and been partially involved in. And I've seen them come and go, and I just want to know what kind of plan is there going to be to sustain the efforts that are being done. And I gave my background because I wanted you to know that I'm not a new community person. I've been involved in the community for years. We'll wait till after, or we make the comments now?
This form's not really designed,
Okay,
although
okay.
we've had a little bit of back and forth. It's really not designed for that. Is there anybody who wants to offer a brief response?
I just personally would like to thank you. I've been on the board for a little over 7 years now, and I was not aware of some of the history you just shared with us. And I made notes, and I think it's very good to have that background and help to inform the task force we have in place now. And hopefully, instead of going back over the same material, we can learn from that and move forward, which I think is what you're saying by the sustainability issue. And I agree. Again, this board is very committed. Our staff leadership, Dr. Wilcox, we're very committed to this issue, and I just appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts with us. It's
Okay.
important.
And one add-on is that after task force is done, will there be a report that'll be issued for the community?
Yes.
And again, with these same things, these measurements, these procedures, these policies, and something to measure. Without the measurements, you're back into the same cycle again.
Absolutely, Mr. Mitchell. I will commit to you and everybody in this room that when we come back to school in the fall, we will talk about our progress to increase the number of minority classroom teachers, kids and teachers together in the classroom. We will commit to sharing that with the community. I can't commit to a specific target number at this point because I just don't know that, but we'll certainly tell about it. The other thing we'll do is we'll talk about our process objectives because clearly, we can go to Howard, we can go to a whole number of HBCUs across the country and show up and, do our dog and pony show and try to get, but if we don't get anybody, if we don't yield any results, then we haven't really changed the face of the school system. So my hope is we can share some of those process objectives. And then we can also share the real tangible results of we have, 15 new classroom teachers, and these teachers are at these schools, so that folks like yourself can take a look and see that we have done what we said we would do. You asked a more threshold question, though, and that is, how will we make sure this is a sustainable effort? And one of the things I think that is probably a little bit frustrating to Ms. Tisdale, Dr. Tisdale, was that it's moving a little slowly. And it's moving a little slowly because we're making sure that we not only have the right recruiting materials so that when we go to a college campus, we have something that actually appeals to the young people that are going to come, that speaks to their generation. We're making sure that we develop the relationships on the college campuses so that we get priority in those campuses. And so, quite honestly, when we leave, what happens oftentimes in these recruiting efforts is the young person turns to their faculty advisor and says, "What do you know about Washington County?" We have to have somebody who's sitting in that chair who advises that student and say, it's a great place for a young person who's trying to they've got a great commitment to technology, they've got a vibrant and engaged community. So we're trying to build all of those kinds of things at once. It's a bit like building the bicycle as you ride it, but we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We don't want to have, in 9 years, another group sitting here saying, well, what did you do? We want to be able to have tangible results. We're going to build on those results each year. Again, I don't want anyone in this room to think that next year you're going to come up and we're going to have 150 African-American teachers, black teachers in classrooms. I don't know that that's possible. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be a goal. I'm simply saying I don't know where we would go to get that many folks right now.
Yeah. I understand it's a process, but without having some set goals,
We will.
okay, without having a philosophy that really funnels down to those who are doing the hiring.
Absolutely.
And I don't think any of you do the hiring. It's at a different level where hiring's done. If they don't have that philosophy and that understanding, then it doesn't happen. So, that's where my biggest concern. I've seen it. I appreciate the effort, but I guess I'm looking for, being a results type guy, I'm looking for some results.
I think if you ask any of our staff members, they're all going to say that I am nothing if I'm not results-oriented. Probably to the point of abstraction with that.
Okay, great.
We'll have some numbers for you. Hopefully there'll be numbers that we can all be proud of, but if not, we're going to double down and we'll keep working hard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
All right.
Those are all the individuals who signed up to speak. Is there anybody else who'd like to offer any comments? Okay, if not, we will move on to the first item under,
I believe you have one person who's coming from the back.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Welcome, sir. You just
Welcome, sir. Good
Let us
evening.
know
Good
your
evening.
name and who you are, and we're
My name
glad to
is
hear
Art
from you.
Hicks. I'm a member of the community. I have 2 sons that graduated from public school in Washington County. And I'm familiar with some of the board members, and they're familiar with myself. So I just want to take a few minutes and share an experience that I'm aware of that kind of flies in the face of what you've articulated this evening. There's a young woman in our audience who's a school teacher for 10 years, applied for a job in Washington County and was never interviewed. The reason she was never interviewed was the interviewing process persons indicated to her that her references never responded. And it is peculiar because these are the same references that she's always used. I find it strange that we can't recruit minorities. When a minority applies and it's not interviewed because the references didn't respond. So I just wanted to put that out there because if we're really interested not only of attaining but maintaining a direct parity, I think we're all aware that legal decisions have indicated that we should have some type of racial composition, proportionality in all government. That's not new. And I don't think the meeting tonight is about unrestricted or unfettered hiring. I think it's more about targeted recruitment and utilizing or exploiting the assets that are available to assist in targeted recruitment. So if I were a recruiter for Washington County Public School System, I certainly wouldn't reject a resume of a 10-year school teacher because allegedly references didn't report back. Now, it would seem to me that if I were aggressive, and I've heard that word used this evening, if I were aggressive about targeted recruitment and retention, I would take the opportunity to follow up on a resume that seemed to fit the need of the disproportionate teachers in this county. I will field or address any questions you may have, but it's just a thought to me that we've been in this situation, in this quagmire, as Deacon Mitchell has mentioned, since the 90s. So here's what I believe. Future behavior is really forecast by past behavior. And if I were a betting person, which I'm not, I believe that the next task force is going to come back with the same issues. We weren't able to recruit, we weren't able to retain, and we're looking at it. But I'm a reasonable person. So if there's something I'm missing, please tell me.
Well, I can tell you one thing you're missing. I wasn't the superintendent in 1991 or 1996. If you look at my track record, behavior predicts behavior, you will get results. I think that's why I was hired, that's why I was brought here. I can't speak specifically to the young woman that you said applied in this district, but I would ask you to leave a name with Ms. Francisco, and we will follow up tomorrow, and we'll follow up with you as well to tell you why we made the decisions that we made. But I will tell you that in the hiring process, we do use references as an important statement of character, and so if they're missing, we're not going to proceed with the hiring. But I would say, back to your point about being aggressive, we should have called the candidate and said, we didn't get your references. Why didn't we get your references? And we'll look at that process probably later this evening, actually, because I don't understand why we wouldn't have. Now, I will also tell you that this task force has been moving forward. Our hiring decisions, by and large, for 95, 98% of our staff were made last June and July. So if this person has applied after that, they probably didn't get looked at through the lens of this task force work. But still, the system has tried to increase its numbers in terms of diversity since my first arrival. So we'll look at why.
Can I call you tomorrow?
Absolutely.
All right.
Call me later tonight if you want.
All right.
I'm around.
I'll hang around.
Call my
Thank
office
you.
tomorrow. Absolutely.
Anybody else have any
I can just,
response? Mr. Ridehouse?
I wish.
Good evening, sir.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Wayne.
I wish your concern, and I'm sorry, I apologize. Usually, I use my teacher voice and people can hear me, but I'm getting older. I wish that your concern, when that occurred, could have come to our chief executive officer, our superintendent. I don't believe it was Dr. Wilcox at the time, but Dr. Morgan or someone. And that individual could have looked into it. It's not something that we are proud of if something like that happened. We kind of, our job is to give the superintendent, a broad view vision of what we would like to see occur. We've done that, by asking him to start the task force. Knowing him now for 3 years, he is very aggressive in getting what he wants and getting the answers he's looking for. So I'm hopeful that when we get the report, that we'll be able to give you the kind of positive answers that you're looking for and not fall back on excuses, which are so easy to come by, and move forward in a positive direction to address what is, to me, a very telling issue. So hopefully, at the beginning of next year, we'll have some good answers for you, or at least answers that show we're trying to move in the correct direction. And I know that with my colleagues, knowing my colleagues, they're looking for that too. So my apologies for what happened, because obviously it was under, I was here at that time. And hopefully with the restructured HR department and materials and technology we have to look at candidates, it won't happen again.
Mr. Reitner, I appreciate your sincerity, and I've known you long enough to know that you are committed to what you say.
Trust
Thank
me
you.
on that.
Nothing else but that, okay.
Yes, good point.
I'll just wrap this up quickly. As I look up here, I don't know if you can see it in the audience, but sitting up there is our new vision statement, which we adopted less than a month ago. And for those of you who can't read it from where you are, I'll just read it. It says, building a community that inspires.
He moved it over
Now it's
there.
over there.
Now it's no one.
Now it's me. That's the last thing we want to see. Right? Building a community that inspires curiosity, creativity, and achievement. That's what we, as a board, say we want to create in this school system. And I think what you have all reinforced to us today is that building a community means a lot of things. And what may look like a welcoming community where curiosity, creativity, and achievement are all inspired to one student may not be an environment that inspires creativity, curiosity, and achievement for another student. And if we want to live as a board and as a school system up to that vision, that's what we say we're about for every single student, every single teacher, every food service worker, bus driver, everybody that we touch every day, it's clear we have work to do. And I think we're committed to doing it. And I thank you for coming and talking to us about your concerns, because we don't get better in creating that community unless we hear from people.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Only this, Mr. Hicks, if you would see Ms. Francisco on your way out, just to give her the name so that she can research it, so that when we talk tomorrow, I'll have a little more knowledge about it. And
Okay.
she'll identify herself to you at the door, and she'll
Okay.
also give you my cell phone number.
Man, I like you.
So
Thanks.
do we. He's a good man.
Is there anybody else who'd like the opportunity to speak? Good evening, sir. Welcome.
Good evening to the chair, to the superintendent, to the board. I'm Pastor Ricky Smith from Zion Baptist Church. I do not live in Washington County, but I want to share with you, after over 20 plus years of military service as JROTC, taught over in Germany in the school system, we promote education. We have a membership of 800 members that we try to promote to our children, and many of you see them behind me, that we want to see diversity. And I believe you, Dr. Wilcox, that you will make that happen along with this board. But please, please, one of them individuals, I have several individuals that are members of my congregation that apply for teaching positions that they didn't contact me. I was one of the references. So it's becoming upon us as educators, as leaders in the community, and I love children. One of the principals at the best school system at elementary school had asked me to come by just to talk to some of the young students so they can see a different face. Would you allow me to say that? So please, 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 I ask you to help us to help our students, that they can achieve, they can be successful. And our church is open to you might want to come and talk to my congregation about education. Anyone from the board is welcome. Just let me know, and you can speak to the congregation about how you, as a member of this board and this community, that can help our young people to achieve what they need to achieve. Both of my children have graduated from college, higher learning. My daughter's a teacher, a trainer for medical, so my son is an engineer for the government. I believe in education, so I need your help to help my members and this community. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments? Is there anybody else who'd like the opportunity to speak? Okay. We will move on to old business. The first item under old business is the second reading of revised policy BF, policy set. We have let's see, probably another hour and a half or so to our meeting. You are all more than welcome to stay, but if you'd like to leave, we won't be offended, believe me. And if you'd like to take a few minutes so it doesn't appear that you're being rude, we're glad to do that too. We appreciate your coming, but please, if I know you have busy lives, so if you have other things to move on to tonight, we won't be offended.
Thank you. Good evening. On March the 4th,
Just wait.
Okay, just give- Thank you. On March the 4th, 2014, the first reading of the proposed changes to policy BF, was presented to the Board of Education at its public business meeting. During that meeting, 5 recommendations were offered. On March the 11th of this year, the Policy Committee conducted a public work session, and the members of the committee focused on the recommendations that were offered during the business meeting. I will now summarize each of the recommendations and the Policy Committee's response to each of those recommendations. The first appears on page 1, Article 3A. There was a recommendation that this section be reworded. The Policy Committee carefully looked at this language, and they believed and concluded it was clear and concise. They are not recommending a change to page 1, Article 3A. With regard to page 2, Article 4A3, there was a recommendation that the Board of Education be referenced in this particular article. That recommendation was adopted by the Policy Committee. With regard to page 3, Article 4B2, there was a recommendation that the term emergency should be defined in the policy. The Policy Committee agreed with this recommendation. If you examine the updated version of this policy, you will find that definition in Article 3B. There was another recommendation with regard to page 4, Article 4C2, that this section also make reference to the Board of Education. The Policy Committee endorsed this recommendation also, and you will find it in the revised policy. And finally, there was a recommendation that on page 4, Article 4F, that this section also make reference to the Board of Education. The Policy Committee carefully reviewed this section, which concerns stylistic changes, and they concluded that the current policy sets forth a sound approach, that is, that any stylistic changes should go to the Policy Committee first rather than to the entire Board of Education. They also believe that the procedures already provide an avenue for members of the board who may take exception or have questions about a stylistic change to make those concerns known. Finally, the Policy Committee examined the 4 primary headings under this policy and concluded that under Article 4, which is currently titled Procedures, that it should be modified to read Policy Statement/Procedures. And finally, in accordance with the standard operating procedures, a public notice was placed on the board docs, and members of the public were invited to provide comments on this particular policy. We did not receive any comments on the policy. We welcome any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion to approve the second read of Policy BF?
Mr. President, I move to approve the second reading of revised Policy BF entitled Policy Settings.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Williams, second by Mrs. Brighton. Is there any discussion? No discussion? And the question is on approval of the second read of the policy. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 6-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With the board's consent, we're going to make a change to the agenda and move the first item under the superintendent's report to be next on the agenda. So if there's no objection to that, we have guests here who've been waiting patiently. So I guess that makes it superintendent's report. Dr. Wilcox?
Yes, it gives me great pleasure to ask Jeannie Singer to come forward and Jim Kercheval. They have a presentation to make and a bit of a report to give on some great activities going on in our community.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeannie Singer. I'm co-chair of the Greater Hagerstown Education Forum. Dr. Mitesh Katari, my co-chair, sends his regrets that he was unable to be here today. You know, he has elementary school swimmers, and he had corporal duty. And corporal duty beats out community volunteerism every time.
Absolutely.
I feel his, I was going to say pain, but it's really not pain when you're, before I stick my foot in my mouth. Go ahead.
So Jim Kercheval, as executive director of the Greater Hagerstown Committee, had to come with me instead and carry the laptop. We had initially asked Dr. Wilcox for the opportunity to come before the board, mostly so that we could express our thanks to the wonderful help that we've had from the staff in the last few months. But while we're here, we thought we'd take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we've been doing. The Greater Hagerstown Education Forum has been focusing on college and career readiness in the last couple of years. And as part of that, we've focused on 2 initiatives. We've actually put out 2 college and career readiness report cards. Our plan is to update it each September. If you haven't had the opportunity to see our report card, it's available on the Greater Hagerstown website, greaterhagerstown.org. It is all information that you are familiar with and that you have seen from various sources. What we're doing is we're going out to those different sources and consolidating into one space that information. And our plan is to update it each year so that the community can track and see how we're doing. One of the things that we found the first year we did the report card is, despite anecdotal evidence to the contrary, our post-secondary education attainment level is still less than 18%. So we wanted to take a look at some things that we could do to overcome the barriers that are keeping our educational attainment levels low. And we decided that after doing some research, the financial affordability of post-secondary education seems to be at least a perceived barrier. So we've done a couple things. We've actually proposed to the county commissioners that they put into place a 2-year scholarship for college and career readiness for every graduate of Washington County. And we are still working diligently to make progress in that effort with our elected officials. And last year we hosted our first FAFSA Frenzy. We held it at the Valley Mall because we have found that for a certain population, going into the school system itself or into our, whether it be HCC or Kaplan, can be an intimidating step on its own. So Julie Rahm was nice enough to offer us space for free. Your staff was phenomenal. They wired all of our empty storefront so that we would have laptops available, and the students came in, and we had financial aid advisors from HCC, Kaplan, and USMH that actually helped 56 families complete the FAFSA in one weekend last year. This year we have our second event, and we completed over 126 FAFSAs for families in a 2-day weekend. So we were very, very happy with the increased levels. We think if we, if we could figure out a way to make the volunteers available for more hours, there's an unlimited number of families that we could help. Another piece that we added this year is Dr. Burnett and his staff were on hand, and in addition to the 126 FAFSAs, the counselors provided college coaching to 40 families of undergraduate students. So parents and students who came in, they weren't quite ready to complete the FAFSA, but they were able to sit down with the counselor, ask questions about the college application process, what they needed to be ready for next year or the year after that when their students are getting ready to graduate from high school. So overall, we thought the event went very well. Great publicity, and again, the Herald Mail helped. They gave us a full-page ad, and Mr. Wright and Mr. Kaufman were fabulous as always with the robocall.
Alert Now.
Huh?
Alert Now calls. We don't
Alert
call
Now
them
call. Alert Now call. I will make a note of that for the future. And we appreciate all the support of the school system, and we would not have been able to have such a successful event either this year or last year without the school system support. And we want to make sure that you are aware of how helpful we have found Dr. Wilcox and the staff members to be. A piece that we added this year in an effort to increase the number of students who were actually completing the FAFSA is we had an Every Graduate campaign, and every Washington County senior, whether from the public high schools, private high schools, or a homeschool student who completed by the FAFSA by March 1st, was enrolled in a drawing for a free laptop. Jim bought the laptop. All I know is it's a laptop, but it looks good. And we, go ahead.
I mean, this is a high-end laptop. This is pretty much everything a student needs, which is kind of that whole part to get them started. We got the laptop, the case, the flash drive. It's got the webcam so they could Skype their parents at home. And I know the school system had offered to give us the Microsoft Office for it. So that pretty much fulfills any need of a college student for their laptop.
Okay.
We did want to thank, there was 3 members of GHC that donated and sponsored this. We do want to thank Ronnie Bresler from the President of the United Bank, Terry King, and Dr. Qatari also was one of the ones that donated the laptop, so we appreciate that. Now is the time we got to do the drawing. So we want to do the drawing tonight. To do that high-tech, we have a app that's a random number generator that we downloaded on iTunes. So we're going to let Justin Hardings push the random number generator, and we have all the kids' names that had fulfilled their FAFSA requirement numbered. So whatever number you draw, we're going to correspond that to the name. We'll announce who the winner is. We're also going to invite the family and the student to the Teacher of the Year banquet in April that the Chamber hosts each year. We're going to invite them and present it at the Teacher of the Year banquet. So Justin.
High tech here, huh? So all you gotta do is push the big button that says generate. I can do that.
Pretty simple. 68.
Say Morgan Wilcox.
Okay, what's first name? Hart Weaver from Williamsport is the winner of the laptop.
Congratulations, Hart
So
Weaver.
Hart Weaver, congratulations. So again, you'll have to wait a month to get it, and we'll get the Microsoft Office for Hart, and we'll get a hold of his family. I think we have the addresses and everything to contact the family, so we'll contact them from here, invite them to the Teacher of the Year banquet, and we'll present it at that time.
We'll actually contact him through his counselor at the system.
Thank
We
you.
want to make sure that Justin pushed the button. For those of you who don't know, I have a sophomore at North and a son who graduated last year. And the odds of me knowing the winner were a little too great for me to feel comfortable pushing the button.
An honest lawyer to the end, right?
But thank you very much for your
Any
support.
comments from any of the board members? I'll just thank you, as Dr. Wilcox did, for what you're doing for the community and for our young people. As I pointed out before, our new vision statement, it's about building a community. And the community is not just a community that's built within the 4 walls of a school. It's other organizations that have an impact on kids, whether that's a church, as we saw tonight, or whether it's community organizations or the business community that all come together to try to build that community that creates achievement. And we want to thank you for being part of helping us to build that community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
That brings us back to where we were in the agenda, which is the first item under new business. That's the consent agenda.
And I've been asked to say, not just to you, Lisa, but to all the board members, if you would actually come a little closer to your microphones. I know we have a tendency to push them back and lean back, but they're having a difficult time picking it up for the television broadcast, as well as the PA in this room. So please lean into your mics. And Lisa, you'll have to be a little bit of a loud talker, not the quiet talker that you can be.
Okay, I can be a loud talker as well.
There you go. Thank you.
4 procurement items on the agenda this evening. I'm going to breeze through them pretty quickly and then open the meeting for questions. There are folks here behind me who are prepared for any questions that you might have for us this evening. The first bid is for a boiler replacement at Marshall Street. We solicited this contract and received proposals from 8 companies. The award of the contract would result in a contractor furnishing all the labor, equipment, materials, et cetera, needed to complete the removal of 2 existing oil-fired boilers and replace them with 3 natural gas-fired condensing-type boilers. We will be reusing existing base-mounted heating water pumps. Looking for final completion of this project in September, and are recommending award of the contract to Musser Mechanical of Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, at a total cost of $188,000. And we are achieving our minority business enterprise participation goal through that selection of that low bidder. Second bid is for track resurfacing project at South Hagerstown High School. The existing track was constructed in 2006. The life expectancy of the track is about 6 to 10 years. Normal use has caused this track to show wear in sections, exposing asphalt, and the track does need to be replaced. This price also is all-inclusive of labor, materials, equipment necessary. We provide a new high-performance resilient track surface. We asked for pricing under 2 base bids just to compare the difference in cost. We are recommending acceptance of base bid 1 for a plexi-track system, which is the preferred and superior of the 2 systems, at a slightly higher price than the alternative product that was invited for bidding by all bidders. And we have several alternates that we're also recommending be accepted under this bid. This work would be done over the summer and be completed in September, recommending the award to American Tennis Courts at a total cost of $131,350, plus the alternates for the extra work that's been done at South High, for an additional long jump approach and some additional takeoff boards and a second landing pit. As I said, American Tennis is the lowest bidder for the total plus the alternates compared to the other bid that we received from Precision Sports. We have also a requisition on the agenda to Hartford Computers for some dedicated network servers. The servers are needed for Western Heights Middle School, Salem Avenue Elementary School, and Marshall Street School. These are the servers that are used for our security camera systems at those locations. And this effort is part of the Information Management and Technology Department's ongoing replacement of technology, routine replacement project. And the 4th item on the agenda is some software and some services that are needed for managing our iPads in the school system. The software would allow us to provide configuration, allowing for mobile handheld devices, and enables us to maintain information securely for the users, and as well as maintain content securely for individuals. The need for the solution has grown since WCPS has purchased more devices. Currently, we own and manage about 5,800 iPads within the school system. We've been pleased with AirWatch for the 2,000 devices that we've used AirWatch for in the past due to the capabilities and functionality that it provides. The IT department did do some research. They've looked at some alternative products in the marketplace, but feel strongly that AirWatch is the solution that in the marketplace that meets the functional needs as well as integrates best with Apple products, allowing for a more functionality for managing the applications that are on these devices. AirWatch is extending very competitive pricing to WCPS. The price quote offers a one-time charge for a perpetual license that will accommodate up to 25,000 devices at $89,910, plus $17,982 is the charge for maintenance during the first year. So the purchase would cost $107,892, but it's essential for the management of the iPad devices throughout the school system. Done. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I'd like to move to approve the bids for the boiler replacement at Marshall Street School to Musser Mechanical, Inc. at $188,000. Track resurfacing at South Hagerstown High School to American Tennis Courts, Inc. And requisition number 168954 for network services for West End schools to Hartford Computer Group, Inc., and $28,443. and software and services for managing iPads to AirWatch LLC at $107,892.
Is there a-
Move for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bailey, second by Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Brightman?
Just, and it may be a technical question, but looking at the AirWatch iPad management system, and on the background information you gave, it talks about the sharing of devices, and I know we have, and Dr. Wilcox, you may have to help me out, 8,000 devices at this point, and in 2 years, we will have to go completely online for testing. And I guess I'm looking at this, if we're sharing devices, it talks about cleaning them off and getting them ready for the next student. Is there a time frame where the test results go immediately to the state or out to the vendor? How is that going to work, and how quickly can we take one device and move it to another student for the next test? I'm just sorry, it just
Yeah.
occurred to me.
Well, I'm not sure that I have all the answers to that, but I do know this, that we will not be in a position to have an individual device for every individual test taker and
Exactly.
also be able to continue our daily instructional program. So we are looking creatively at the solutions that can best manage that process. For the assessments, the park assessments, I do not believe that any specific answers are going to be cached on the machine. Is that correct? Arnold? Boyd, do you know?
I think probably Maureen probably could answer that question best, but the AirWatch, I don't think will have anything to do with
No.
what we're doing with testing. You know, when we submit the test, that test is gone and done.
That's what,
Right.
because
And
they
you
were
move on to
talking
next
about
student.
cleaning one device
Right.
off and turning it over to another student. And
Yeah, I think we're kind of mixing issues.
Okay.
Let's just stay with the testing for a second. The answers to the tests will not be cached on an individual machine. They will be gone once the student does them. They're off, and then they're going to be scored and gone. This is really talking about the fact that we have students on a device. We want to be able to manage that device remotely without having to lay our hands on it and plug it into something. So AirWatch will allow us to do that. AirWatch will allow us to push updates to that machine. So if there's an operating system issue, we can push that patch through AirWatch. If there is an application that we want to add to the iPad, an instruction up, we can push that to that. The other thing is, we know then through AirWatch where that device is all the time, so it helps us with our management of the devices. If a device walks, I believe it's possible to actually shut the device off,
Yes.
so that there's no utility in stealing one of our devices.
That's correct.
it just said it can wipe it clean of personal data before the next student uses it.
Yeah, because there are applications where kids put things in, or a kid might go to a website and be asked to put some, registration information, like here's my name and here's my grade, here's my teacher, things like that. And this would just allow us to get rid of that kind of stuff. Was I close on all that?
That's
Not bad, for being
Allows us to do
kind
it
of well read.
remotely. In the past number of years, off and on, as we've gained other technologies, there's been times the technology departments had to go out and touch 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 devices across the summer. So with this type of software, it's my understanding, with the limited knowledge I have, what Dr. Wilcox has described, we'll do a lot of this remotely.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Are there other questions or discussion? If not, the question's on approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 6-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2 under new business is consideration of the FY 2015 General Fund Operating Budget. Mr. South.
Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Superintendent, members of the board. As you know, the budget process has been progressing very rapidly over the past month and a half. On February the 18th, the superintendent and his staff presented the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2015 general fund budget to the board in a public work session. Then on March 4th, the board accepted the superintendent's recommendation, incorporated a slight increase in its own travel line, and adopted the resulting document as its draft FY 2015 general fund budget. Last Tuesday, March 11th, the board held a public hearing on the draft budget and also heard the recommendation from its Budget Advocacy and Review Committee. A copy of the draft budget was included in your Friday packet and was also circulated for the public on board docs and on the WCPS website. Since the hearing last week, board members have had the opportunity to individually review the draft budget to satisfy themselves that it will provide the students of Washington County with the very best education possible, and also to formulate any additions, deletions, or changes that they believe need to be made to that budget. Today, the budget calendar calls for the board to approve its fiscal year 2015 general fund budget for presentation to the Board of County Commissioners. That presentation to the Commissioners will occur on April 1st. All of that being said, staff recommends that the board make any final changes that it deems necessary to its draft budget and adopt the resulting document as its approved fiscal year 2015 general fund budget.
Thank you, Mr. South. Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the FY 2015 general fund operating budget.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Motion by Mrs. Brightman, second by Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion on the budget? Mr. Ridenhour?
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to move to amend the budget document. Looking at page 33, the board travel line from the 9,500 agreed to during the work session back to 5,500. Move the 4,000 to contracted services line, or a line where the superintendent can utilize these funds to assist our partners at the Children's Village.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion to amend by Mr. Ridenhour, seconded by Mr. Bailey. Just because I was scrolling through my budget trying to get to the right page, can I ask you to restate the motion just so we're all sure that
Yes, sir, no problem.
we're all sure
I move
exactly
to
what you're after?
Reduce the board travel line, which is located, I believe, on page 33.
33 of 40?
Yes.
Okay.
And from 9,500 to 5,500, and move the 4,000, to the contracted services or a line. There is no specific line where this would show up in this particular document, where the superintendent would have the authority to utilize the funds to assist our partners at the Children's Village.
Is everybody clear on what the motion is? Okay. Mr. Ridenhour, you have the right to speak
Yes.
first. Your motion.
Thank you. I'm making this request in deference to several of the speakers at our budget hearing, as well as several Washington County Schools employees who emailed me requesting I continue to oppose the extra funds in this line. I apologize to my colleagues that I did not send the emails that I received and share them with my colleagues, but the senders, one in particular, did not want to be identified for fear of retribution. Further, it is my belief that the funds would be of great assistance to an organization that has been of great benefit to our children over the years, that being Children's Village. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Are there any other comments?
A point of clarification, Mr. President. The indicated amount that would be used to support Children's Village, that doesn't eliminate looking beyond that number. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mine is to use that number to either supplement or to provide that amount of funds to that organization.
I just wanted to make try to clarify that point.
Is there other discussion? Mrs. Brightman?
Mr. Ridenour, I appreciate the amendment. I'm having problems with tying the first part of the amendment to the second part. Because in my view, I would think we would need a process that would help Children's Village to have a very consistent amount of money so they can build their own budget. And the way to have that, I think, is something like a fee for service. And I would prefer that decision to be really handled by the superintendent. I think we do something similar with the Maryland Theater when our students attend events there. So I'd like to see that consistency with that funding, and I think everyone here knows that I support trying to find a way of helping Children's Village. I think I brought that up during the work session. The other clarification I'd like is that the money, the $4,000 that was added to the original $5,500, is not new money or extra money. It was actually just reallocated from, I believe it was meals and communication. So it was not, again, new money. We just put it in a different item in the board. And so I would just, and I sort of see that as a separate issue. And then I would just finish with saying that even though I understand and respect my colleague's right to make any amendment he or she chooses to make, I find it uncomfortable that in a $259 million budget that we're spending time sort of fixated on this issue, and it's concerning that it couldn't be more about the children than our own needs. So I will end with that.
Is there other discussion? I'd just like to see if other members want to speak before we come back. Mrs. Williams?
I too am concerned about the matter of Children's Village. I view that program as a tremendous asset to our community and to our school system. To Mrs. Brightman's point, I understand what she's saying about fee for services. My thought was a little different in wanting to see that as a line item in the budget so that they could know exactly what our school system was going to be putting out so that they could plan their budget accordingly. I think that the program there, the real-world learning that occurs at Children's Village, is not likely to occur anywhere else. And I just think that the school system needs to be supportive of the village, and the amount that Mr. Ridenour is proposing, I don't think anywhere approaches what we need to be putting forward to support that program. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Are there other comments? Mr. Ridenour?
Let me go back, and again, I'm not saying that $4,000 is going to cover the entire needs of the Children's Village. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at setting up a model, as Mrs. Brightman mentioned, and I do take that, take a little bit of offense with the fixation term. This is, yes, maybe it's a fixation, maybe it's not, maybe it is. I understand and realize that $4,000 and $200, I can do the math. It is a pittance. I'm not even speaking to that. But we are setting an example, and a pittance sometimes makes a statement. 78% increase in a line item for us. That to me is a statement. So whether or not I'm fixated or whether or not I believe strongly in our setting an example for everyone, in a tough budgetary time. It's always going to be a tough budgetary time for Washington County Public Schools. We have a limited amount of money. We have a budget that's based on a significant amount of money that comes from the state because we're poor. You know, I have problems, you know, being happy when the state gives us more money, because it's saying that, well, you're poor because the figures that they use are based on free and reduced meals. So I'm looking at that respect, in that respect, and again, as I'm saying, there was one speaker who spoke in reference to this line item at our public hearing, and there was an individual that came from Children's Village who said they need somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000. Okay, so this is a portion of that number, a small portion that I think we could easily sacrifice in order to help that organization. So it's my opinion. I have no delusions that this will pass. But the bottom line is, I feel strongly that we can help an organization and set an example through passage of this amendment.
Are there other comments? Mrs. Harshman?
As a lifelong learner, I have found it necessary, when I taught for 30 years, to attend professional development classes. I appreciated them, I learned from them, and as this is set up, it's for the same thing for the Board of Education. Without some of the information that I've gotten from these classes, I feel that the job I do would not be nearly as good as it is. I think that everyone has a space for learning, and everyone should apply any kind of abilities to improving in any situation. So through the professional development that is required by policy with our state conference, I feel, and I work on a committee for the state conference, I feel that this is very easily justified. We require all our other employees to attend professional development. So I think that makes a statement when we also attend professional development. Because as I said, I've never been to one of the classes that I didn't learn something very worthwhile.
Are there other comments? Since I was the one who proposed the compromise on the travel money, I'll just once again sort of state how I got to the amount that I thought was appropriate to put there. I think the amount that's there, giving about $1,200 to $1,300 per board member, is enough so that if a member desires to go to the state conference, that they can do it on the allocation for themselves. It also provides enough that if a member wants to go to one of the national conferences, with the new policy and the help of some of their colleagues, they're also able to do that. So I think it provides the right balance, the right assets, so that members can attend the sorts of activities that Mrs. Harshman's talking about, but it also puts some limit on it so that you can't just go to everything. You need to sort of work with your colleagues on the things that really are important and are going to benefit you and the board. So I continue to think that the dollar amount in travel is correct. I also believe that 3 of my children went to Children's Village, and they came home from Children's Village, and my son wouldn't go to bed until I checked every smoke detector in the house. Clearly, he took something away from that experience. He went thinking, I get to drive these go-karts, and he came home thinking something different about public safety. That made an impact on him, and I think that's a very valuable service that Children's Village provides to our students. And I'd like us to support them. I believe we will. I think Dr. Wilcox has talked about, through a partnership, providing support for what they do, whether it's in a fee-for-service model or some other model. I trust him as the superintendent. Clearly, it's the will of this board to continue that experience for our students, and I trust him to find a way to make that happen within the budget that we're going to pass. So for those reasons, while I appreciate the sentiment of the amendment, I'm going to oppose the amendment. Any other comments? Mrs. Williams?
Yes. Dr. Hardings, in addition to travel to the conferences that you mentioned, the national conference, the state conference, We also, as members of a board, have to pay to attend any type of training offered by MABE. They have leadership programs. So it's not just a matter of travel to a conference. As Mrs. Harshman has mentioned, it's professional development for current members of the board and for future members of the board. So I too agree that it's a reasonable amount, and I am going to oppose the amendment.
Are there any other comments? If not, everybody's clear on what the amendment is? The question's on Mr. Ridenhour's amendment to the FY 2015 General Fund operating budget. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The motion fails. 2 in favor, 4 opposed, and the student concurring and the student opposed. Okay, we return to the original motion, which is on the adoption of the budget. Is there any discussion or any further amendments? Mrs. Williams?
Go ahead.
Okay, yes, I'd like to offer an amendment. I move that the superintendent's budget for 2015 be adjusted to allow for the continuation of the position of assistant principal at Fountaindale Elementary School and Hancock Middle Senior High School.
Is there a second?
I don't know what page that's on. I'm sorry. It's
In the summary.
Wouldn't be in
It was, yeah, it was in the summary, it was in one of the PowerPoint
executive summary.
presentations.
I think I can find the page here in just a second.
Let's understand.
It'll be on page 3 of 40. If you look at the top, program staffing summary. Under assistant principals, elementary, you'll see a -1 in the second column from the right, which is the change from prior budget. Likewise, likewise in the high school assistant principal line, which is 2 lines down, you'll see another -1 in that same column.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Williams, second by Mrs. Harshman. Is everybody clear on what the amendment is? Okay, if so, Mrs. Williams, you have the right to speak first to your amendment.
Okay, thank you. Having taught at Fountaindale for a decade and having worked at Fountaindale as an itinerant resource teacher for a number of years, I know the importance of and the value of the assistant principal position at that school. Historically, Fountaindale Elementary School has shown the need for additional resources and support, not less. And in light of the recent changes to the state discipline regulations and the impact those changes will have on the work of our school-based administrators, along with the demands of a more rigorous curriculum and time-intensive teacher evaluations, I'm not in favor of reducing the number of administrators at Fountaindale with the thought that lead teachers will pick up the slack. Hancock Middle Senior High School is unique in its configuration. It's one of a kind in Washington County. And for many of the same reasons stated earlier regarding Fountaindale, I'm not in support of the elimination of the position of assistant principal at Hancock Middle Senior High.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Ridenhour?
I will not support this. I think the superintendent is in the best position right now to make a determination as to what type of administrative staff he needs. But I am concerned as to where this approximately $200,000 is going to come from. The motion is to not eliminate, but it does not offer a place where those funds will be pulled, from where those funds will be pulled. So for those 2 reasons, I'm not going to support it.
Is there other discussion? Mrs. Bright?
I opposed 2 years ago the elimination. We didn't eliminate the position, but we didn't fill the position at Hancock of AP. And I think in the interim, Dr. Wilcox, we've added a social worker, we've added a half counselor. Can you help us understand what we've done? Because to be sure that that community is served.
Well, Mr. Gaiman, who is the principal there, does have some additional staff, but he doesn't have the administrative support that I think was the intention of the motion to omit. When you look right now at Hancock Middle Senior High, the last September 30th enrollments, there were 268 students with a classroom allocation of 22 teachers, and that gave a pupil-teacher ratio school-wide, and averages make liars of us all, but 12 to 1. Right now, we're spending an awful lot of resources in Hancock. I am not aware, through communication with Mr. Gaiman, that he can't handle the load right now. Yet at the same time, it's always difficult to eliminate administrative positions because boards in bad times are loath to give them back. But we thought here, after 2 years of experience, the needs of the community were being largely addressed by the social work and counseling services as opposed to the disciplinarian that the assistant principal's role typically kind of devolves to. To Mr. Reidenauer's point, if the board asked me where I would find the $200,000, there are several larger lines that I would look at. I think I was quoted in the paper as saying that the salary resource pool that we've identified is fairly deep right now because we want to do a lot for our employees, but I certainly could look there as one beginning place, as a placeholder, and then as we went about negotiations, if we had a settlement that needed those monies back, we would look somewhere else. But in the short term, that's probably the largest pool that I have of discretionary dollars right now, because they're not allocated. I think when you look at Fountaindale Elementary, the pupil-teacher ratios there, based on the 351 students and the classroom teachers, including Title I, is 18 to 1. That's on the high mid-range of our elementary schools right now when you're playing class-wide averages. But its free and reduced lunch rate is significantly higher than a number of schools. So that sometimes brings a number of other issues with it. Perhaps not the least of which is parents who want some additional services for their children and young people. So I'm certainly not opposed to either, but right now I think both schools are pretty well resourced. That's why we made the recommendation that we did.
And if I could continue with my thought is if the superintendent and staff and the principals at those schools, I'm sure they've been brought into the discussion, feel they are able to provide services to their community, school communities. My concern is if this amendment passes, we're tying up money in two positions that may not actually be staffed. They're just going to be on the budget as a placeholder. And I would rather see that money actually being used rather than being held. So unless Dr. Wilcox responds differently to that, I would have a problem supporting just a empty position holding that amount of money. Because, I mean, that's basically a position doesn't have to be filled. And that AP to Hancock hasn't been filled for 2 years, but that position's still been there. So this is capturing that money. So that's where I'm, yeah.
Well, the way I interpret the motion is that Mrs. Williams wants those positions filled. So if it were the board's will to keep those the dollars there, I would then change my position and fill those positions. I would not let them sit empty. You know, when you I keep looking at numbers here that were made available to me some time ago, so I wasn't as fresh with them as I perhaps could have been. You know, I quoted the classroom ratios for regular education programs. There are also some special education programs at Fountaindale. I'm not sure what the program is there, but it has and I might have to defer to Dr. Marco or somebody, that also might create some other needs at that school as well. So, again, I'll be guided by the board. But I also want to be clear about one other thing. We did not sit down with Rodney Gaiman at Hancock Middle and preparing this budget and saying, Rodney, we're preparing to eliminate your position. We simply had not filled it for 2 years, so we didn't then sit down and renegotiate it with him, nor did we do that with Megan Dodd at Fountaindale when she took that position. We didn't sit down with her and say, we're not going to fill this position. So I just didn't want you to think
No,
that conversation went on.
I appreciate that. That was an assumption.
Mrs. Williams?
A reasonable one, by the way.
I just have a question. Dr. Wilcox, I was under the impression that Hancock Middle Senior High School had an administrative intern there
Yes,
that
it
would
does.
be, and so how is that position funded? And does that position not have with it responsibilities that an AP might assume if assigned there?
It does have, they do have. We have 3 intern positions right now in the system, is that correct?
Yes.
I believe that's correct.
It's in the budget.
Okay.
I mean, that's
Well,
that's
I'm
what
not
I'm looking at, but I don't know.
I believe we have 3 administrative intern positions, and they do many of the duties that an assistant principal would do, but because they are not, somebody has to help me with this. Did we move them to the administrative pool, or are they a teacher position?
Teacher.
Teacher, so they can't help with evaluations, they can't help with some of the other things. They can do some things with discipline, but they can't do some of the things that,
Vice principal.
an assistant principal could perhaps do.
Dr. Wilcox, just a question along that line. Is it possible for administrative interns to do that sort of thing? We have an administrative intern at Barbara Ingram, and it seems like she does a lot of the things that an assistant principal would do. You obviously said there's some things that...
By design, that's what we want them to do. We want them to have that kind of experience where they're doing everything that they can, except those things that they're statutorily precluded from doing, like the teacher evaluation process.
Okay.
No other comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bailey?
I'm terribly concerned that in 44 other schools in the system, we could go back and review the organization reports there as the staff has done in order to prepare for this budget, and we could find discrepancies in 44 of those schools. We could find large class sizes. We could have kindergarten classes of 27, 28 youngsters, which is a handicap situation too. My point being, I don't think this is any more deserving than looking at everything else in the system. And I will vote against the amendment.
Are other comments? Just so I'm clear, that the last time these positions were staffed, the Hancock position, the last time it was staffed was over 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago.
Was in the middle of the year of 2000, my first year here, 2011, 2012.
And the last time the Fountaindale position was staffed was
Last year.
fall.
Last fall.
Or last spring, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. A number of the people who, and including the BARC, made comments about, the Budget Advocacy and Review Committee made comments about once you take a position out of the budget, it's really hard to get back in. Yes and no. When Dr. Wilcox first came here, he did a review of everybody who worked in the central office. And he told us at the time he was going to try to make it leaner. And he told us at the time as well that, there may be some places where I go too lean, in which case I may come back to you and ask to put those positions back in. And if I'm not mistaken, you have put a couple of those positions back in over the last couple of years.
We have.
Some of the curriculum specialist positions where you said, it really makes more sense to divide it up a little differently. So you have not been shy, and I think the board has not been shy about supporting you when you say that you did cut too far. And another example is the mentor teachers, which I think you heard feedback from teachers as well as some people at this table throughout the course of the year that we cut those out of the budget, but it would really be beneficial for some of our newer teachers. And I think you heard those concerns and you put those back into the budget. So I don't really have a concern that Dr. Wilcox is not willing to come back to this board and ask to restaff positions or place back in the budget positions that at one time he recommended that we cut. I think that's what we pay you to do and what I honestly trust you to do. So in this case, I'm going to trust what your judgment is and say to you at the same time that if at some point during the next year you believe that you've cut either of these positions, if you reconsider the decision to cut those positions, I hope you'll come back and tell the board and we can have that conversation. And finally, budgets are about, we've talked about budgets being about making plans. They're also about making choices. Because you can always ask yourself, if I had an extra $500,000, here's what I'd do with it. Or you can say, if I had $500,000 less, here's what I'd cut. Those are the difficult conversations you have to have when you get to the very edge of what your budget looks like. And in addition to the two reasons that I already stated, I'm hesitant to support an amendment to the budget that doesn't include the offset. Because if we as a board are going to give the superintendent direction, no, you can't take away those two positions, you got to keep them. And I think we should also be telling him, and here's where you should get the money. Because he's told us what he thinks the budget should look like. And if we're going to change it, I think we have to adjust it on both sides of the ledger. So for those reasons, I won't support the amendment, although I certainly do appreciate the concerns of the Budget Advocacy and Review Committee, of Mrs. Williams, and the other people who have spoken to us. Are there other comments? If not, the question is on Mrs. Williams' amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion fails, 1 in favor, 5 opposed, and the student member opposed. Are there other amendments or discussion? No further discussion on the budget? Okay, if not, all those in favor of Mrs. Brightman's motion to adopt the 2015 general fund operating budget? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 5-1, and the student member concurs with the majority.
Thank you.
Mr. South. Next is the superintendent's report.
Oh, sorry.
The second half of the superintendent's report is.
Yes, that threw me off for just 1 second. So what I've asked the team to do is to come forward, and we're going to spend some time this evening talking about our mid-year reading update. Much of the data that you're going to see today is a look at the Lexile levels of students and also their progress as measured on 2 administrations of the Measures of Academic Progress, which is our testing regiment for young students in the elementary and middle school grades. That said, Maureen, it's all yours.
Right. Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Hardings, members of the board. We present some county-wide reading data, like Dr. Wilcox said, using Lexiles and MAP scores. I want to start with high school progress first. The Lexile of 1185 is used as the bottom range for the Common Core to determine college and career readiness for students. So we looked at 1185 as the benchmark and the cutoff for students that are ready for college. We examined all of the student data for high schoolers, and we looked to see the highest Lexile that the student had achieved within their career and used that to determine the reading level. Students that did not meet that benchmark were identified so that they could get some further help, and then also retested to see their progress. So students who achieved the benchmark of 1185 were not retested, only the ones who had not yet achieved that goal. This graph is the percent of students who are achieving the Lexile of 1185. We start with grade 9. So in spring of 2013, this was when they were still in 8th grade. And you can see it's about 29% of our students are already achieving that Lexile in 8th grade when they move to high school. We have fall and winter numbers. Fall rises to about 38%, and then by winter, they're at about 39%. For 10th grade, again, we see them for fall 2013, and then spring 2013, and then fall and winter of 2014. So we are ending up at about 52% of our sophomores achieving that 1185 benchmark. In 11th grade, we have about 64% of our juniors achieving the 1185 benchmark. And then finally in grade 12, we're seeing about 68% of our students achieving that benchmark. For students who are in grades K through 8, we are looking at their measures of academic progress, or their MAP scores. We are looking at the Roush unit, which is the RIT score, and this is compared to the means and standard deviations that are published by NWEA through their documentation. What we looked at was we wanted to establish a baseline data to get a educationally meaningful point that our teachers and administrators could monitor their students' progress for SLOs and see their relative growth based, kind of comparing themselves to themselves. So we chose that it was either above the published mean or half a standard deviation below the published mean according to NWEA's standard deviation and means. Since the students are in their second year of MAP testing, we are also able to look at the cohorts and kind of monitor their progress against themselves. So not only are we looking at last year's versus this year's, but then also looking at as they continue through the district. Grades kindergarten 1 and 2 have an audio component to their test, so that is where the test is read to them. So they're able to, even if they can't read completely, that they're able to access the test. The red bars on this would be last year's kindergartners, and the blue bars would be this year's kindergartners. And they're both fall and winter, so the lighter one is fall and the darker one is winter. So you can see that last year our kindergartners fell from fall to winter, and they fell less this year from fall to winter. Grade 1 looks similar to this. We have, again, them entering at a certain range and then falling slightly. By grade 2, we're seeing this evening out slightly. And again, this is the students at the mean or a half a standard deviation below the mean.
I'm sorry, can I just ask, just for clarification?
Yes.
Because I want to be sure I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
So if the distribution of our students' scores was exactly the same as the normal distribution across the nation, we would expect each of those bars to land at 67%?
Correct.
Okay. So anything above 67% on these bars shows that we're better than the national, not mean, the national distribution. Anything below would say that we're worse than the national distribution.
Correct. And you'll also see that when we look at the means in the cohort data.
Great, thank you.
In grade 3, now again, I want to remind you that this is where they move from the audio test to the red test. So we see a slight decrease when they enter into fall, but they're rebounding and increasing about 72% of our students are scoring within the half a standard deviation or above. And then grade 4, similar, and grade 5. Moving to middle school, grade 6 is around 70%. Grade 7, slightly lower at about 67 to 68%. And grade 8 coming up about 72 to 73%. Now again, these are looking at different students from grade 8. The red again was last year's, and then the blue is this year, so we can only compare them to themselves. These next graphs are comparing the cohorts to themselves. So this is the same group of students that are moving through the system, except for the pre-K, which is a smaller sample size. The sample size from last year's grade to this year's grade is approximately equal. So you can see this is this year's kindergartners, and you can see that they're increasing. This is this year's first graders, so our class of 2025. And this is also helpful because then we can compare how our last years are doing with this year's. This is this year's second graders. And then the red line represents the NWEA mean. So you can see, like Dr. Harding said, when we're higher in kindergarten, we're above the NWEA mean. So our average score is above the mean. These are our current third graders, our current fourth graders, our current fifth graders, and these are our current sixth graders. And then dropping in the mean, you can see that in early elementary, and again, just to highlight, in second grade they have that red test to them. So now we see the second grade next to the third grade. You can see between second and third grade that there's a difference between the two, and we see a slight drop, but we attribute that to the red test as opposed to the audio test. Again, this is this year's sixth grade, just to compare it to middle schoolers. This year's seventh graders. This year's eighth graders. And then these would be the current ninth graders, but I put that in there so that you could see how our current eighth graders are looking compared to our last year's ninth graders, or last year's eighth graders. Again, here's the NWEA mean. So you can see we're either slightly below, at, or slightly above, so close to the mean. What we've seen is emphasizing literacy, continuing to emphasize and trying to reach that benchmark of 1185 all the way through high school is helping our students to reach that goal of 1185. We see that early elementary school kids, when they have the test read to them, when they have that audio component, they do better than the NWEA mean. And then late elementary and then into middle school, we see that it slips slightly, but then by the time we're getting to eighth grade, that the mean is coming back up closer to the NWEA mean. We are seeing an increase in the schools using these map results to group students and to really understand what type of readers that they have so that they can actually help the kids to grow as readers. We're going to continue to monitor those Lexile in the high schools so that, again, we can provide supports of what the students need outside or inside of the classroom. And we have a lot of the principals now using these data points for their SLOs for the state. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you have regarding this data.
Questions or discussion? Mrs. Bright?
I hesitate, but I'm going to jump into this a little bit. Help me simplistically understand the cut score, the 1185, and the means, whether we're talking MAP or Lexile, and how that relates to what an old-fashioned terminology grade level. So when I were to sit down with my child's fourth grade child's teacher would this tell me they're reading above or below grade level? Are we talking totally different? Am I mixing apples and oranges here?
For the 1185, we are getting that from the Common Core as a benchmark for students who would emerge from high school as being college and career ready.
But what does that tell us about literacy? Are they reading at a grade level?
They should be reading, basically what it says is that they could enter into a college and be able to read the textbooks that would be part of a college curriculum.
So that would be considered above grade level?
Well, I would say probably.
What about the map then? Let's go to elementary school. Maybe that's a little bit easier.
Okay.
What does that tell us? That mean, that 67% is the mean? Is that correct?
The 67%, the first graph that I showed you, would be within a half a standard deviation below or above the mean.
Okay, so what does that tell me about grade level reading?
What that
Is
tells
my fifth grader or fourth grader reading at a level with the other students in the class or below? How do I relate this to the average parent?
I think what we're equating it to is how do they compare to the average student? So the NWEA sample is a large sample, and it is across the country, so it's not just Maryland students. And saying, I guess it would depend on whether you would state that the average student across the country is reading at grade level. If you would say that a fourth grader who has a certain MAP score is at grade level because they're an average student, then by comparing it to a mean, you could say that that student was reading at the average level, which one could call a grade level. We also do change that to Lexiles, and Lexile and Common Core both have ranges that they would call appropriate for students of a certain age. It's hard to say, it's hard to pin down some of these companies in terms of saying this is grade level.
And I get that, but I'm coming back to sitting down with a teacher wanting to know how my fourth grader is reading. What is that teacher going to give me this information, or is the teacher going to say your fourth grader has a good grasp of vocabulary, understands the content, is probably reading at a fifth or sixth grade level, something that the average parent might be able to relate to?
So before you answer, let me ask the instructional team to come up and join you. And go ahead and answer, and then Matt, would you kind of kick in? Because I think what she's trying to say is, if my son has a Lexile of 1185, is he reading what we would expect him to read as a senior in high school? And, well, I think the answer is yes. I'd like to hear from you guys. So why don't we start with the high school piece and then come back to the elementary school piece?
Okay. The 1185 is a grade level, but it's a band. So it includes the 11th and 12th grade. So they don't differentiate and say, you're reading on the 11th grade level or the 12th grade level. It's a combined band. And it is the bottom of the band that they show for the grades 11 and 12. That's what PARC considers college and career ready, meaning if you reach that level, that 11-12 band, then they consider you college career ready. It's just as far as your reading skills go. Doesn't mean you're prepared in all ways. But that's as close to, I mean, they do have Lexile scores that sort of, but they run in bands, usually in 2-year bands, so that you can't say, but if you're at the bottom, you can kind of make that assumption. If you're at the bottom of the band, especially in those earlier grades, that you're probably reading appropriate for that first grade in the band. But once you reach that 11-12, some students are going to reach that 1185 early in the 11th grade. Some aren't going to reach until the end of the 12th grade. But regardless, if they reach it, they're considered college career ready.
So Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about elementary school?
With the elementary, we look a lot at the RIT scores. So for example, if I'm just going to use arbitrary numbers, so let's say 150 is a RIT score that would be at a fourth grade level. That is when a student finishes the assessment, if they give them that RIT score, that gives the teachers an indication of whether or not they're reading based on the expectations that NWA has identified as a student reading at that fourth grade level. So If a student is reading on a 140, they would say that they're below that expectation. If they're reading at a 160, they'd be above that expectation. Those scores then also can match with the Lexile level and can give that band that Rick was talking about. But the elementary looks a lot at the actual RIT score that the kids receive from those assessments.
And this information is all shared with parents during the conference meeting.
There's actually a lot of schools that I know that are using, there's the reports that teachers can print out that show the RIT score, that can also show the Lexile match with that, and then we'll have graphic data that can show how the students are performing based on their level, whether they're low, average, high, and it breaks it down into the different types of reading strands as well.
And there's plenty of help for the parents to be able to understand what is.
Yeah, so the report that a teacher then could give to the parent might say, your son or daughter comprehends well for a fourth grader. They have, they read with fluency and accuracy. So that the parent then has a pretty clear picture of how their son or daughter is reading, because just giving an arbitrary score, like a RIT score, doesn't tell a parent anything. It's the narrative behind it.
Thank you.
That helps the parents. And I think our team does a pretty good job of providing that information. But here, when you're talking about thousands of kids, it's easier just to talk about averages. So when we talk about the 1185 as being college and career ready, it is at the bottom of the 11-12 band. So do you really think that the average 11th grader is off to college or university and going to do well? We would probably all say that young person's going to struggle. But they're at the approximate expected place for an 11th grader to be at that time. We hope to then improve them so that their score is in the 1200s or some number beyond even.
Thank you.
Now, I'll amplify a little bit too, because part of how it's communicated is 3 times a year I get a letter that's over Dr. Wilcox's signature that tells me how each of my children did on their most recent MAP test. So you get one in the fall that's got the RIT scores on it, and then underneath it says this is for both reading and math. Then underneath it, it's got categories broken down. I can't remember what they are exactly, but on each one it tells you whether the child scored average, above average, high, or low. I think those are the 3 terms.
Yes.
And it always puts their previous tests, so what they got in the fall. We just got the one for winter, by the way. So the sheet always has on the one side what they achieved in the fall, and then on the other side it's got what they achieved in the winter. So you can see the 3 months of
Growth.
hopefully growth.
Right.
And so there is a lot more information that certainly is coming home to parents. To me, it's much more useful, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but, well, it is more useful to me than simply child's reading above or below grade level. I mean, that really doesn't communicate much. But with the richness of the information that comes home, you can see the areas where your student improved or where they didn't improve as much as you might hope that they did. So all that said, on the plus side, and staff's all holding their breath now, there's nothing on the bad side, there really isn't. But it is a change in the way the conversation sounds. Because parents, and I know kids, like when your kids were in school, are used to
Dark ages.
your 4th grader is reading on a 7th grade level, or your 4th grader is reading on a 2nd grade level. And there's none of that communication.
Or they scored at the 75th percentile.
Or they,
Right.
yes.
Where they were as good as 75%
Of the students.
youngsters
That's
taking
right.
the exam.
And the conversation is not in that language anymore. And I just, speaking personally, there's been a learning curve, I think, for most parents. And I'll be honest, I think there's been a learning curve with administrators and with teachers. Because the first couple of times when I called to, or spoke with administrators, what does this really mean? You could tell they were learning too, but that's okay. I mean, the more you use it, the more conversational they become with it and fluent they become with it, and I think are better able to explain it. But to I think your point, there's a lot more information in it, which requires more explanation. But my experience has been that we're getting there in terms of being able to have that communication between parents and administrators and teachers.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Are there other questions or comments?
I think what we just uncovered is that we who do not have children in school need to see the chart or the the performance chart that goes home.
We'll get a copy to you.
That would help us understand.
Mrs. Williams?
I was just going to ask what you would like me as a board member to know as a result of this mid-year update as to how our students are performing.
Don't all go at once. Go ahead.
Well, I can just speak to the cohort graph, especially. I like comparing the students to themselves. I think it actually shows some really nice growth data. I think the other thing that it amplifies is in some of the grade levels, elementary, we still are seeing and recognizing that summer dip, when you look at the spring to fall data. So that's something we're continuing to look at and address and trying to look at how we're increasing our supports for the summertime. So getting data like that, I think, is very important to have because it's showing us growth, but then it's also showing us those time frames that we need to address and figure out the best strategies to work to continue increases versus either flatline or dropping down.
And I would add that what it's done what this data does for secondary ed is that there's been not enough attention paid to literacy on the secondary level. It's something very new to us. This is the first year where we're actually going to have that reading data on high school students, at least up until that point that they reach 1185. And so, it can drive a lot of instructional decisions. Before, we just assumed that students were no longer learning to read and they were just reading to learn. But we know that our students have to be, very fluent readers to be successful in college and careers. And so now that we're monitoring that and measuring that and using it to drive instructional decisions, I think we're going to find that we're going to be very glad that we decided to make English year-long again. And to make our core subjects year-long again because of the impact that we're expecting that through the process of disciplinary literacy to have on high school reading. And now we're going to have some good data to tell us whether or not it's working. So it's pretty new to secondary, at least in high school.
Sure.
I appreciate your comments, and with regard to instructional decisions, as I look at this, I see cohorts, I see grades of students, but I don't see any kind of disaggregated data. I don't know anything about low-achieving schools, high-achieving schools. This doesn't help me know in terms of allocation of resources. We just talked about positions here, administrative positions. So I would appreciate having that kind of information to be able to know how our students are performing in individual schools, not just in cohorts, not just by grades. That would be helpful to me.
Mrs. Harshman?
On the page that says summary of data, I was a little concerned. It says early elementary students score above the national mean while using the audio test, but achievement slips when they move to the reading test. Is there something that we are not doing to keep their ability to read at the same level as their ability to understand something that's read to them? I know that that's a difficult time because they are, but is there anything we can do to keep that from falling as far as it did on some of those?
I think our current focus now with our primary grades, with really trying to go back to strengthening our fundamental skill, our foundational skills, our phonics-based skills, what will help approach or will help kind of bridge that gap. I think some of that data would show that the students going through the audio test, since it's read to them, are able to comprehend a little better, but then may lack some of those baseline skills. They need those foundational skills. So we're really taking a hard look at those phonics-based instructions, the foundational skills, and really trying to attack those at the early level so that when they get to that third grade, they have those skills that when they're reading that text in front of them, they're comprehending it just as well as they would with the audio.
Is there some way to identify them before they have to take the first test, which would alleviate that drastic drop?
The data that you receive from the MAP assessments, and Dr. Hardings was talking a little bit about it, how it looks in the parent report, well, the teachers actually get a lot more rich data than what's even on there. They can look at some of those skills, and if you have a child who's struggling with comprehension, or if you have a child who's struggling phonetically, they can show some of that data within the reports they get and begin to provide some interventions for those students based on where they see maybe those needs
But
would
is
fall.
that only after the test?
Well, when they take the assessment, let's say in spring, then yes, they can disaggregate some of that data and so if they're taking the test in kindergarten or first grade, they can start seeing some of those deficits earlier to approach what they need to work with those kids.
I think it's important for the board to know that we don't use the MAP assessments as a summative assessment, which is kind of, I think, where you might be going.
No, I'm thinking more of like
We-
a diagnostic.
That's how we use the MAP, we use it as a formative assessment. So when we present the data here to say, well, here's what they did, what we use it for internally, after they take it, then we use it to inform the instruction that the kids are going to get going next time. That's how we're getting the growth. So you get kind of lagging indicators reported, but what we get, and that is to Mr. Bailey's point, not only is the report card more informative for parents, the material that comes out for a classroom teacher about individual students is fairly powerful information. So much so that I think most teachers probably have a hard time digesting the information on individual kids over 30 kids or 28 kids, because it's a page and a half of data on most kids. And it's fairly detailed about specific things that kids need to work on. So we use this as formative.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that's important for parents to know, too, that this is a formative assessment for us. It is not a summative assessment like the PARCC assessments will be, or like the HSAs have been, or the MSAs have been.
Are there other comments or questions? Not? Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nicely done, thank you. Dr. Domain, thank you.
Next item on the agenda is personnel action.
Thank you for staying with us.
Me?
Yes.
Where would I go? I just need a running start to get here. Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board, as discussed in closed session, there are several staff changes for your review and consideration.
Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move for staff recommendation on personnel.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bailey, second by Mrs. Brightman on personnel actions. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the personnel actions recommended by staff? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. The student member abstains.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reports to the board. Mrs. Harshman, curriculum.
Curriculum and instruction has not met since our last board meeting. We will be meeting Tuesday, March 25th at 11:15 in the board conference room. Everyone's invited, and the agenda will be posted.
Thank you, Mrs. Harshman. Mrs. Williams, finance.
Finance Committee. The Finance Committee will not be meeting this month, will not be meeting in March. We will be meeting on Tuesday, April 22nd at 3:30 in the Finance Conference Room.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bailey, facilities.
The Facilities Committee will meet on the 25th here at the central office location.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Ridenhour. Human
HR
Resources.
will meet the 25th in the HR conference room.
And Mrs. Fisher asked me to deliver her report on policy review and development. The policy committee will meet next Tuesday at 1:45, which is our usual time. At our last meeting, we incorporated the board suggestions for policy setting, which we considered earlier today. We also worked on the student discipline policy, which will lead to the regulations. Had a very good and extended discussion as we try to sort out what exactly we think belongs in policy and what belongs to be left to the regulations. So we'll continue working on that at our meeting next week. Anything from MAID? today?
The MABE Legislative Committee meeting was canceled this Monday because of weather and rescheduled for March 24th.
Anything from conference planning at MABE?
Well, go ahead. We meet this Friday in Annapolis for the Conference Planning Committee.
Okay. And student government?
Student government met last Thursday, the 13th, and we will be meeting on April 1st at 9:30 a.m. at Washington County Technical High School, and we will be holding the election for the next student member of the board intern at that time, so you're all invited to come out and interrogate them all you want.
Unfortunately, I think we have a meeting that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I hope once the new member is selected, or elected, not selected, elected, you will bring them to introduce them to us.
Yep, and then their term will start the 1st of July when Coleman takes his office as the student member of the board and I step down.
Excellent. Next is future agenda items. Agenda planning did meet earlier today. You will all receive the results of our work in your packets this weekend. One thing of note, we added a brief discussion on April 5th regarding, this isn't an action item, but more of a report of the transition between the MSA and the PARC assessments and what that means for students of different grade levels if your child's in the HSA and PARC. If your student's in the 8th grade, for example, and takes the algebra HSA, what does that mean as they move through high school? How is that transition being mapped both locally and throughout the state? So that's the one big addition we had today. I think with that, we'll move on to board member comments. Mr. Grunendijk?
Nothing.
Mrs. Harsman?
Well, I had a wonderful time out at Paramount Elementary School. Little children were dressed like leprechauns. This was on Saturday afternoon, and it was the most adorable thing I've ever seen. Plus, the teachers and the staff and the parents put so much energy and effort into it that I would like to congratulate them. And the kids had a wonderful time, and that's the kind of thing that really makes a community school. So I would like to thank them for inviting me and tell them what a wonderful time I had. And it's posted on my Facebook.
Mrs. Williams?
I have nothing.
Mr. Bright?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Bailey?
Just one more hurdle has been met with the opening or the completion of the board cafeteria here at the facility. Passed all health department inspection and ready to go.
And just to be clear, it's not for the board, although it is in this building. It's available to all employees and guests who come and work or visit here. Mr. Ridenhour?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
I have nothing either. If there's no further business, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.